we tend to do, the sizzle. It's a structural component, but it's an exposed structural component. So when we're involved in a commercial project, especially, we're brought in to do the area that is designed to wow people. And there's a lot of, it feels good to be that guy.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Ethan Biederman, who works at South County Post and Beam in West Kingston, Rhode Island. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Ethan, thank you so much for being on the show. How are you?
Good. Good to see you guys. We're having a pretty good time now that this weather is nice out here.
How's your everyone healthy at your house? Everyone okay there?
Yeah. We've been fortunate. There were some illnesses in the extended family, but other than that, in our little area, we've been doing pretty well.
What happened to your extended family, Ethan? Did folks get the COVID?
Yeah, we had an older relative that actually got COVID, I think about 2 months ago, and passed away.
Sorry.
And it was actually up in Vermont where there were very few cases, but it was kind of a surprise, and it happened very early on. So it was a real shocker for us just to see somebody who lives so remotely.
Wow.
Get ill.
And what about your workplace? Is that running as same as before, or has that changed?
Production-wise, we're actually very, very similar to normal. We've made some changes, but luckily our industry, we tend to work with a little bit more separation than, say, guys that are doing, interior remodeling or some of the, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing trades where you work in very close proximity on a regular basis. The office has had to change a lot in order to, just kind of be a little safer, a little more proactive. So a lot of us are working remotely, that we're in more of an office position so that the guys in the shop have less exposure. And the guys in the field, really actually we've had to make a couple smaller adjustments, but really travel and lodgings were actually the most significant adjustments we had to make to that area.
What are your guys doing in that regard? I'm going to have to deal with that pretty soon. I'm thinking of renting an RV.
Well, really what we're doing is now everybody's traveling in their own vehicle and people are staying in their own rooms. Whereas before, you kind of dogpile 4 guys in a truck and, 2 guys in a room. And so it's really a cost factor. Mm-hmm. I don't think the guys mind it that much, but, obviously just as far as vehicle use and things like that, it's been a little bit different. I mean, there are certain ways you can travel in the same vehicle, wear a mask and be a little safer. But for the most part, we're just trying to play it as safe as we can. And that's obviously close proximity, sealed environment kind of thing.
Oh, that's interesting. But can you I'm sorry to go on this tangent here somewhat, but can you build those additional costs to your customers or are you guys eating those extra expenses?
I would say it's a mix. A lot of what we do is also commercial. So on residential, I think we've had to hold the line a little bit more often. It's not hard to explain, but customers are working typically with their own limits and budgets and things like that. With commercial work, there's a lot of contingencies in there, so that if the general contractor or the construction manager is able to negotiate increases across the board, then we're able to get some compensation for that. So I'd say it's kind of a blend right now. And obviously, our goal is to continue being productive and putting up buildings. So I don't think we've been extremely aggressive about it. If it's a situation where it's just not going to happen, we're going to still move ahead in most cases.
Can you tell me briefly how you got started in carpentry and then what brought you to South County Post and Beam? You've done a number of different things in the residential building sector, right? And then you went to this timber frame company.
Yeah. So I kind of oddly, I started, I think like most of us do, messing around with my dad and learning stuff that way, working on the house. I think I was 11 years old. Actually, my high school had, which was 7 through 12, had a really amazing theater department, and there was kind of a shortage. So I got kind of roped into doing painting and set building for my older brother, who had a position but didn't really like doing it. And we had an amazing guy there, Tom O'Brien, who actually for 6 years was just a mentor to me, and I spent 6 years learning carpentry and painting and things like that, and all in theatrical and display. But it's same skill set. So coming right out of high school, I went into working for a general contractor. I actually worked in display in New York City for a few years, doing theater and sets and TV and things like that. And it was great, but the schedule and the work is murder. I mean, 100-hour weeks, 100+ hour weeks on a regular basis. So I got offered a card and went into a cabinet shop, which I loved. And then came September 11th, and there was no work to be had anywhere for any major shop. So I ended up having to go out on my own and taking on side jobs. And that was, I guess, almost 20 years ago. And that's kind of how I ended up on my own. And I worked in residential remodeling predominantly for, I think, 16 years.
What kind of remodeling did you do, Ethan?
What kind of what?
What kind of remodeling? Kitchens,
Oh,
bath?
yeah. Yeah, I did primarily, interior at first. I was actually, since I had a cabinet making background and display work, I did a lot of finished carpentry and things like that. And so I do, kind of high end homes and apartments, doing, upgrades, trim work, cabinetry, casework, and then also a lot of high end painting on the side, which is obviously not carpentry, but they do go hand in hand.
Sure.
And then from there, I would kind of move more into kitchen and bath because that tends to be the most lucrative sector that I enjoyed, and I had a lot of trim and detail. And then when my daughter was born, I finally gave up and said, I don't like being a slave to other people's schedules when it comes to kitchens and baths, because people are very aggressive about schedules. And I understand that. But it was hard to maintain a good work-life balance. So I actually went entirely into doing, kind of medium to high-end decks so I could work outside, because it's hard to explain that you absolutely have to have a deck. That's not really a real conversation. So decks was a lot more relaxed, and I could kind of work down to a 40 or 50-hour work week and spend more time with my family. And that's what I was doing up until Josh at South County Post and Beam had offered me a position. And honestly, we were just commiserating. I've known Josh for a while, and we were commiserating. And I was saying, these are the things I love to do, and these are the things I hate to do. And he's kind of backwards. And I said, I'm really kind of overrunning a crew, and my body's falling apart. And but I love developing projects. I really do like working with the customers and figuring things out and kind of getting the job going. And that's exciting to me. And that's what he wanted. So, just over time, we kind of worked it out, and I started working for him a little over 3 years ago.
And what do you do there? What is you mentioned that you get the projects out of the ground, but can you walk me through like how a typical one of your projects goes about?
Yeah. So I do a lot of commercial work as well, which I know isn't really the focus here. I'll touch on that briefly. But if we're looking at like a home project, which is actually pretty straightforward for us. I mean, we've done, I honestly don't know, probably 600 or 700 homes, but so, somebody will walk in the door, and most of the time they have no idea what they want, which we're all kind of familiar with that process. They come in and they just want to hash out some ideas. And we do have an internal design department, but also very frequently we work with outside architects and things like that. So for me, one of the first things to do is decide what's the best design path for them. Like, do they really need an architect, which is true a lot of the time, where they really need somebody to kind of do that deep dive into the design process with them. Other times it's fairly straightforward, where they come in and they say, we really love the style of what you do, help us do it. And they want what we do. So that's where we'll tackle the design side internally. And so the first few rounds of that, before we even go to contract, we'll actually sit there and we'll say, okay, well, let's kind of flesh out and see if we can pin down what you're looking for and start looking at some real budgets. And if they have a clear direction, that can happen really fast. And if they don't have a clear direction, then we sometimes need to go to a design contract where we just kind of try to get through the schematic phase so that we can actually help them budget, the project that they want, where, we need something to price. We need something to help them budget. Square foot costs are super unhelpful, I find, in the construction industry. They're just, they're out there. But I mean, I've been in the field for over half my life, and, I wouldn't ever use square foot costs for anything I'm planning on doing myself.
So tell me something. I would assume that many of your clients in an initial design meeting, how do they even know what timber framing is? If you ask a lot of people out in the general public, what kind of building is this? Would they know a timber frame from a stick-built structure or any other kind of structure?
It depends on where they are. I find New Englanders are frequently aware of timber frame. There's a lot of confusion with timber frame and post and beam. And, the reality is that they're actually very similar. I mean, they're one is a subset of the other. And 30 years ago, they they were the same thing. It's just kind of semantics now, as to the joinery, as to which is which. But in New England, timber frame is pretty ubiquitous. So lots of people that have lived in New England for most of their lives have seen timber frame homes and are familiar with the style. So there's a smaller learning curve. We do definitely get lots of inquiries from people that have no idea what we do. I get on a daily basis an email, somebody saying, "Hey, I'm building a house and it has posts in it. Can I get some posts?" And we got to kind of figure out what that all means. And I really do appreciate that it's a challenge. Everybody thinks of things in different ways, but our customers have typically been kind of researching the process and know what they want more often than not when they walk through the door.
Well, so you just briefly touched on, you guys do all kinds of work. You do residential structures, you do commercial structures. You did the biggest timber frame I have ever seen in my entire life for a ski resort in Vermont. For starters, what is it like managing those different size projects? Those are very different skill sets. And secondly, is a big timber frame just a collection of smaller timber frames, or is it a totally different structure altogether?
Yeah, I mean the like, for example, like the Hermitage Club, what you're referring to is actually really kind of just like this, traditional timber frame on massive amounts of steroids. I mean, it's just a giant traditional timber structure. We were lucky; we worked with DeStefano and Chamberlain was the engineer of record on that, and he is one of the kind of global experts on timber frame design. So it was designed really well. So it went well. They are extremely difficult to manage. That one, I think, when it went up, they were working in like sub-zero temperatures on a regular basis. So, I think the weather was probably one of the largest, obstacles on that kind of project. We do a lot of commercial, like kind of mass timber, using glue laminated timber and things like that. Those are very different animals. That would be what's now kind of more considered post and beam, where you have a lot of mechanical connections, not wood joinery. And those are very different processes for installation, because you're kind of assembling and bolting together. And, sometimes it's shockingly similar to like steel construction, where you just steel construction where you want to wear white gloves, which is a big difference. But
sure. What are your favorite projects? You mentioned the Two Roads Brewery in Connecticut one time, and we still have to meet up there at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah, I love any project where I can drink beer after. But, I mean, you can make any project that kind of project. But Two Roads was a cool project. I mean, we really didn't do. I mean, it's a large building, and we just got to do. The nice thing about what we do is we tend to do the sizzle. It's a structural component, but it's an exposed structural component. So when we're involved in a commercial project, especially, like, we're brought in to do the area that is designed to like wow people, and there's a lot of it feels good to be that guy. There's a lot of amazing construction people out there that you never see their work. Like, their job is to be hidden. Like low voltage guys, nobody ever says, "Wow, the low voltage in that building was so sexy." I mean, that was great. But in what we do, which is probably part of the reason I like it, we're out front, and that was a great design. And actually, the GC Petra was incredible to work for. It hummed along. I mean, we were out there for just such a short period of time, and it's just a great looking project, and the beer is really good. We're doing another brewery right now, and I'm also very excited about that project too.
So what company is that one for?
That's Tilted Barn. It's actually right up the road from us. So I've been working with the owner. I think I met him like the second month I was at South County Post and Beam. He kind of walked in the door thinking about doing a tasting room out of timber. He's the nicest guy. Like, it's a family business. And he's got this sick little old timber barn that he brews in, and he needs a much bigger brewery. So he was kind of planning it out and doing all the right steps. I mean, super smart guy. But ultimately, we were just having this conversation where he was putting a wood building on the front of a steel building. And then we, through discussing it, he was going to spend his entire life in the steel building. And he's really kind of bummed out about it because he's working in this great old barn now, but he works in the back. And so we just started exploring what, options and value engineering that we could make the back wood and just see if it would ever make any financial sense. And we got there. Cool. And then through that process, he actually hired us, and we're the general contractor on that, which is a little less common. We do general contract projects, but I'd say, we probably do, less than 10 a year out of, probably 60 projects a year that we do, because they need to be close, and he's as close as you can be.
What is your geographic reach Ethan? Like, how far will you guys travel?
I, it's actually kind of funny. I don't think there's really a limit. I think the biggest challenge is logistics and does it make sense? Because, one thing that we focus on very strongly is the guys need to get home. I mean, the road guys need to have a life. They can't go out in the field for 3 months. There's companies and occupations where that's part of the norm. Like the oil field industry and stuff like that. But like our guys all have families. They need to come back. So if they're going to go out for 2 weeks without coming home, that means that should be the only 2 weeks. It can't happen over and over again. So that just ultimately results in higher costs. So we're doing, like a Washington D.C. project coming up fairly soon. There's some other stuff we've delivered frames to Florida. We've gone out to Michigan.
Will you let other contractors put up your frames? Can that be done?
Yeah, that's actually very common. Even locally, there's contractors that kind of love timber frame, but they'll buy basically what's considered a kit from us, where we'll fully prefabricate everything, and then they'll tackle the installation. It's honestly a kind of a cool thing. A lot of our customers are contractors and carpenters that are kind of getting on in their experience, and they're doing a personal project. Like we just did a cigar barn frame for a local GC. He's at that point where he's setting up his personal property and doing the things he's always wanted to do. So we cut these great frames, and his guys come in and put it up, and he's part of the process, and it's really rewarding.
That's really cool. How many folks work at your company, and what is the breakdown between the folks who build the frames, those who put them up, and those who work in the office?
So there's usually about 30 people at the company. I think we're actually going to be adding. Actually, I think we have and are adding about 2 more right now, kind of to compensate for a little bit of the remote working slowdown that we've seen. So basically, there are roughly 10 people involved in the office, including the owners, that do everything from design to project management, purchasing, office management, all that stuff. We typically have roughly around 8 guys in the shop itself, and then we have about 12 guys in the field. The guys in the field actually, as far as I know, every single one of them can hand cut a timber frame. So it's not at all unusual that 2 or 3 or 4 of those guys from the field might come into the shop to help push some frames out, and then they'll go out. And then almost all the guys in the shop actually know how to go on the field as well. So it's a little fungible, but if you just look at their kind of core responsibilities, that's about the breakdown, because we typically have about 2 crews out in the field installing separate projects at any given time, and the 7 or 8 guys who are going to be in the shop can actually kind of keep up with those guys. And it's all about making sure that we have frames coming through and guys to install them.
Have you noticed a slowdown with the pandemic?
I think we had a couple projects that were postponed. One of those I know we're already talking about getting back into action on. Inquiry wise, no. I mean, it's actually been kind of chaos here. I think a lot of people are home and have time to think. So on the business development and estimating side, I think we're seeing higher amounts of inquiries than we saw last year. All in all, I don't think we've had a single day of layoffs really going on. I know on the office side, we're actually, most of us are working slightly more hours because we're a little bit less efficient than we used to be, as we're kind of learning to work remotely, although that's getting easier and we're getting better at it.
Do you think that things will go back to the way they were with you guys all in an office at any point? I mean, it seems to me that once you figure out you can do this, the attractiveness of working from home, speaking for myself, is hard to walk away from, right? I mean, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everybody because I haven't taken a poll. Most of the guys I've talked to would love to be back in the office. I speaking for myself, I worked, from home essentially for years. I like going to an office. I mean, there's times where you don't necessarily feel as productive, but our organization also kind of focuses more on, getting work done. And we're a little bit less stringent about, come in, punch in at this time, punch out at this time. I mean, it's more about get the work done. And so we might see some differences, and some guys may be working remotely, occasionally here and there for, if they're not feeling well or if they need to be home with their family, things like that, because we've kind of mapped it out.
Mm-hmm.
But the The social piece is important, I think, for almost all of us. Like, especially like I know on the design team. I mean, having those guys together, like kind of spitballing and saying, "Hey, take a look at this." That's definitely less efficient, and it's less fun. It's more cumbersome to share a round of drawings, and Zoom meetings are not as productive as just having a quick question and getting back to work. Um, I definitely
That's
would like to get out of my basement.
I've noticed that the one area where my work life has changed significantly, and not for the better, is in that creative spitballing process. It is not the same as having an interaction face to face to have a Zoom meeting. I totally agree. Changing gears here a little bit. This is something we talk about with all the folks on this part of the show. How do you guys pre-qualify clients so you're not wasting a bunch of time doing work for people that can't afford what you offer?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not just in my experience, it's not just can't afford. It's even if the money's there, is the value there for them? I mean, does the cost of the product is the product worth that to them? Because I mean, a lot of times the disposable income isn't the challenge. It's just, are we adding enough to the project that they say, hey, this looks the way I want, and I'm good with the price. That's actually a big part of what I do early on is kind of have these conversations. And for me, the easiest thing is to say, okay, well, what are your ideas, and try to get a sense, like, can we really map out what they're looking for? Are they at that point we talked about earlier where they know what they want, or are they just in the broad open, I'd like timber somehow kind of thing? If they're in that broad open category, I always ask really quick, what kind of budget am I working in? And sometimes people will share that. Very often people won't share that. I do explain that it's not like I'm just going to say, well, great, that's how much money I can get. I mean, it doesn't work that way. But I do understand that people are concerned about that. But if they're willing to share a budget, then I can pretty quickly say, okay, well, here's what we could do within that budget. Does that sound good? Um, that's the most productive conversation we can ever have. If it goes that direction, that's perfect.
Do they give you a budget for timber frame elements or a total construction budget, or is it both?
It's usually more total for residential. It's usually more total construction budget. Look, I know how that converts. Having worked in all the other areas of it,
Mhm.
I know what portion of it is. Timber frame isn't automatically a major cost adder to a residential project. It certainly, a lot of people assume that it would be, and I understand why. Designers that are not as familiar with timber will kind of design a home and then shoehorn timber in there. So it's just a straight up cost factor. But the way we design it, the timber is the structure, and we're going to look at an enclosure system. So in the end, it's like, well, we're comparing what we do to a high performance home. If you're looking at a high performance home with no trim whatsoever, then yeah, we're going to be more expensive. But if you're going to do a comparable high end trim package in that home, you're going to start seeing a lot of parity. Um, so that's one of the first things that we ask very quickly. I will frequently just to talk ballpark numbers on total construction costs of homes. If somebody says I want a 2,000 square foot home, and I'll say, I don't mind quickly saying, well, I mean, are you thinking of at least, say a $500,000 budget for construction out of the ground, meaning that doesn't include your site work, it doesn't include your landscaping, it doesn't include any other cost than the actual construction cost of the home. Is that in the realm of possibility? And sometimes people say, no, I'm thinking about 300,000. And I have a real conversation saying, I don't think it's gonna happen in any form of construction, really. But people don't know what they don't know. So I try to be helpful early on with those kinds of conversations. Once we make it through that very first round, we quickly go into doing a rough model of a frame. If we have an idea of the size of home they're looking for, or I'll show them a similar home and say, hey, here's about what this cost. And we can kind of get that budget in there. And we do all that as, kind of, we do it for free, honestly, just because that's our business model. I think it makes a lot of sense when folks want to charge for that part of the process as well. But getting something down on paperwork and saying, this is what this costs as early as possible is really important for me to have productive conversations.
Well, if somebody just doesn't have any money for a timber frame structure, do you try and get them to have a porch or some other element? Is it worth it to sell that little timber framing, to put it bluntly?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, one of the more common things we see, and actually, I'm a big fan of it because a lot of designs now, like somebody will come to us with an architect set of plans for a home, or they'll bought a set of plans, and the roof line is crazy. It's all chopped up because it's all just trusses up there. Well, that's not going to convert to a timber frame because timber frame is exposed. It needs to make sense. If you take some of these, crazy roof lines that are in, modern design that we have now, you'll never do it with timber. It doesn't look good. Timber needs to be simple and clean. So one of the things that we look on those that makes a lot of sense is say, we'll do a few trusses for the great room. That's a great way to do it. We pocket them right into framed walls, and they look fantastic, and it's timber. It's not a timber frame, but it's not, the trusses are up there. It looks really good. We've taken that further and say, okay, well, we'll do the timber trusses for the great room, and then maybe we'll do a timber portico. And then now, honestly, 90% of people are going to walk in there and say, oh, you got a timber frame home, because they're laymen. And honestly, they're right. I mean, there's timber frame. It looks great. And, if it's designed right, those are still structural elements, so they actually reduce the framing costs. And so it's not just an adder; it's it's kind of a balance where you can find some good value in there, and you're not just spending a lot of money on trim, as sometimes it seems like that.
What are most of the frames made of that you guys build? What species?
The balance right now seems to be Douglas fir. It is a good choice if you like the aesthetic of it, because the aesthetic is everything in timber. I mean, you're going to see it. But if you like the color of the wood, and most people, I think, kind of gravitate to that warmer tone that the Douglas fir brings in. It's it's a warm brown. It does get super dark, but it's this really nice looking wood. It's also quite cost effective due to forestry management out west. I mean, they've always done a good job, so they really have to jump on kind of the East Coast species. And it comes in huge sizes that we can get. And if we're using like a boxed heart grade or something like that, it's actually really cost competitive. We do, quite a few white pine and white oak frames. I haven't seen a red oak frame in quite a while. And, sometimes we'll do southern yellow pine as well, which is kind of overlooked up here in the Northeast, but down south, it's really popular. It's actually can be a beautiful wood. And it's really structurally a great material.
Can I assume that the Douglas fir is the least expensive species to work with, or is the southern yellow pine similar in cost?
Southern yellow pine can be a bit less. I mean, it's a little harder quality control on the materials, especially, getting everything up here. I don't find it to be a major savings. If you're looking holistically at the cost of the timber frame, you're not going to see a big difference. Getting into the cleaner grades is where people tend to see a big difference. I mean, white pine is actually a bit less than Doug fir. It's just a raw material, but it also needs a little bit more handling. You need larger timber sizes. So on balance, they're about the same cost. If you get into like a free of heart Doug fir, where there's no heart in the tree, so it's gonna shrink and be a lot more dimensionally stable. You're not going to get that checking. Then you're going to start looking at larger cost factors. Although, again, that's actually a really popular material because it is a very clean material. So a lot of our frames use that free of heart Douglas fir, which you can't get in pretty much any other species at larger timbers. You can't get a 8x10 out of anything else that doesn't have a heart in it.
Interesting. Well, because the logs aren't that big, right? I mean,
Right,
it's just
right.
physically not enough tree. I got one more question for you. So you and I were talking one morning about a CLT project, but you told me, and we were talking about residential construction generally, you said, if you're in this business long enough, you will be crippled. And I think about that an awful lot. And I talk to tradespeople who complain about the toll that their work has taken on their body. Do you think that you really need to be crippled if you've had a career in construction? And how can we be better to not make people have pain and health problems the rest of their lives?
Yeah, I don't think you have to be. I think that our generation is, for the most part. I mean, right now I look around and, I think at the most part, for the most part, anybody that's been in it for more than 20 years, if you're not injured, you probably just have better genetics. I hate to say it, but I see guys that are like 60 and they're going and they don't do anything right, but they're okay. I've had 4 rotator cuff injuries and I've got snap tendons and all sorts of stuff. So, kind of segueing out of the field was almost necessary. I just saw the writing on the wall. And honestly, every day there's pain involved. And I know a lot of guys that are kind of in the similar boat. And I will say we're all very good at just kind of ignoring that pain. And that tends to, I think, more than anything, lead to the long-term injuries. I think there's a lot of things we can do as an industry, and we are starting to do as an industry. Shorter working days, taking breaks. Honestly, that's a huge thing. I mean, most of my damage came from doing, 12-hour days with no breaks. I mean, just cumulative wear is brutal. I'll say, actually, one of the things I love about South County is that we have the equipment to make the guys safer. I mean, the guys aren't picking up timbers and carrying timbers around. I mean, we have lots of forklifts. We have all sorts of different equipment for moving things around the shop, and that right there is a massive step forward. So you look, and we've got I think 3 guys in their 60s, 3 guys in their 50s working in the shop, and I mean those guys, like, if it's getting hard, then we need more equipment to help them make it easier. I mean, and that's really the answer for most companies. But it's very difficult I know for especially smaller companies to sit there and say, well, I got to buy this, I got to invest in this to protect my guys. But that's a huge part of it. I mean, almost everything can be done easily and safely if you have the right equipment. I mean, they build, massive, massive buildings where every single piece is put up there with a crane, or 2 guys can throw it on their shoulders and, carry it up the ladder. But we all know that that's not the right path. I think the next generation, I'm hoping going forward there'll be less pressure on them to do things that are bad for them, and there'll be more resources for them to do what's, right and what's safe. Still be productive. Production matters a lot. But if we're rewarding that behavior, then we're going to see a lot of guys that are still doing this when they're in their 50s. And honestly, that's what we need. I mean, we have a trade gap. We have a skills gap. We don't have the employees we need because, most of the people in their 40s and 50s are trying to get out of it. They're hurt, and we don't have anybody coming in.
It's been lovely talking to you, Ethan. Thank you.
It was good talking to you.
Anything you want to tell our listeners before we go?
No, stay safe. Get out there, enjoy the outside while you can, and everything looks good on this end. So keep your chin up if you're having a rough spot. Like the industry's recovering, and hopefully we're finding safe ways to move forward.
It's great, man. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ethan for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you very much for listening, and happy building.